Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Catherine Asaro, and she is a science fiction and fantasy author. And for readers unfamiliar with your work, Catherine, how would you describe what you write?
Oh, wow. Well, it depends on the series. I'm currently writing the Major Bhaajan Mystery series. And it's science fiction mysteries. It's a little bit hard SF, but it's not, I don't go into a lot of scientific detail. I used to, and I think readers were skipping it. So I softened up a little bit on that, but it's definitely science fiction. My Skolian Empire series, of which the Major Bhaajan series is actually part of, it's space adventures, space hard SF. There's battles, there's all sorts of stuff, but it's mainly concentrated on the saga of this family throughout several generations. And it's definitely science fiction. Some of it's hard SF, some of it's softer. Almost everything I write is science fiction, but I did write a fantasy series called the Lost Continent series. Usually when I would write fantasy, I'd go, oh, but wait a minute, I can think of a scientific reason to make that work. And then my fantasy would become science fiction. But
And
then this is someone from Luna, which was a new line. Harlequin was trying to branch out into fantasy and set up a fantasy line. So they approached me because I was known for being able to write, science fiction for a wide audience. And I said, well, everything that when I try to write fantasy, it all turns into science fiction. And then they told me how much they'd pay me. I said, I can write fantasy. They were very good to me. And, I was very happy with that series. The magic is based on geometry and the optical spectrum. So, you know, my science background kind of crept in a little bit.
I was going to say, you do have a science background.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that
Um,
makes it easier for you to write science fiction.
it's true. I didn't know I was writing something that many people considered hard SF till David Hartwell, my soon to be editor, said, we're looking for stuff like this. We're looking for good hard SF because not a lot of people are writing it now. And naive me said, what's hard SF? Oh, he said by his definition, it was science fiction that was well based in known scientific fact. And then you extrapolated from your life.
Right. So your latest book is The Jigsaw Assassin. And could you tell me what was the inspiration for this book?
Well, it's the fourth book in the Major Bhaajan Mystery series.
Mm-hmm.
It's a series in the sense that it revolves around the same character, but they're all standalone mystery books. The first Major Bhaajan book, it's funny. People say, where did that come from? I don't actually know. I did figure out, I wrote an essay on John Scalzi on his website has this series where authors can write about their books, the big question. What big question are you answering in your book? And I did finally figure out where in my first book, the idea for that whole Major Bhaajan milieu, so to speak, came from. The first book was called Undercity. And the Undercity is below, there's this gorgeous city called the City of Cries on a planet in the universe, the Skolian universe. And the Undercity is like a slum below it. It's these people living in the ruins of this ancient civilization that, they don't have access to light. They don't have access to much of anything. People who live above them know almost nothing about them. They think it's a few homeless people. And it's this whole beautiful civilization. I mean, they have gorgeous art, incredibly, all sorts of things. But they also have great poverty. It's side by side. And Major Bhaajan, she runs with the gang when she's a kid. And she has this wanderlust, and she's also very good at fighting. I mean, her gang protects a whole circle of people. So she finds out you can enlist in the army. So she does. She doesn't exactly know what she's doing at first. In fact, she's too young the first time she goes, and they say you have to come back when you're older. She does, and she discovers she's very well suited to that. So well suited that she climbs from the enlisted ranks to the officer ranks. And a lot of it was about the resistance she encountered. The Undercity is very badly looked down upon by most people. They didn't believe someone could come out of the Undercity and do well. And she had to fight every inch of the way, but she did, and she succeeded. She was very good at solving problems. So eventually, after she retired as a major from the Army, she became a PI. And that's kind of where the story came from. And if you had asked me 2 or 3 years ago where that came from, so I don't know. And I didn't. I mean, I really didn't. The reason I figured out at least a little portion of it was because when I wrote this essay for John Scalzi, I realized, I wrote about how I came up with the word Undercity. And it came from, I didn't know until I was helping to write the Wikipedia page for my high school. They had just kind of deleted everything. And I came back and said, well, I went to that high school, delete a lot of good information. And the other editor said, well, we need, you need proof, you need background, because the things that were up about this high school are kind of unusual. It's an inner city urban high school that was one of the worst in California. And in the Wikipedia page, it said, well, this was a great high school. So, I did a lot of research so we could rewrite the page. And it was a phenomenal high school at one time. It is an inner city urban high school. And I think Undercity came from the word inner city, even though I don't like the words inner city and urban, because they come with a lot of stereotypes. The assumption that those of us who went to schools like that aren't going to excel. We aren't going to, I went to Harvard and got a PhD in theoretical physics. That doesn't fit,
Not at all.
And that's a whole nother story.
Okay. So what kind of research did you have to do in writing in writing the Jigsaw Assassin?
I always do research, for the little stuff. The big stuff's already done for the Scrolling Empire. I always do research for the little stuff. I try to stay current on current developments, because one thing I've noticed in technology is that stuff that I thought was new and clever and look at this, 20 years ago when I was writing, exists now. It's not science fiction anymore. So I have to stay current with it, make sure I don't say something stupid, like, oh, well, they didn't have this when in fact we have this now. And so, I'm always doing that. I'm always researching, like, for example, they live in a smart city. It's got smart air, right? It's got little tiny bots, little tiny things, dust in the air that's always cleaning. And that allows them to track what's going on in the city, which, number one, raises all sorts of questions about privacy, right? And we're on the threshold of being able to do stuff like this now. And of course, there's privacy questions that come up. But the other thing is, if you want to commit a crime and not have Major Bhaajan solve that crime, you have to figure out a way to outwit incredibly good security measures. And part of the reason they bring her in is they can't figure out these crimes. These 3 important scientists were each killed in a place where they can't find the bullet, even though they were shot. There's no bullet holes. There's no evidence. There's no evidence of anyone going into the room or leaving. It's like a closed door mystery raised to a science fiction, impossibility. So they want her to come in and figure it out. The other thing I was doing was, it's something with AI. I don't want to give it away. So I will. The AIs in the story are often having arguments, and then you find out why.
Okay. All right. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out the Jigsaw Assassin?
Well, I would say I met my deadline. I think Well, my editor left when I was in the middle. I met the deadline and I told him, I said, well, do you want me to send it to you? I said, I'm having readers look at it and I know you always look at it. Do you want me to send it to you, this draft, and then I can incorporate everybody's comments together? And that's about the time he left. So then actually the publisher took over being my editor. Tony Weisskopf was publisher. And she said, no, just make all the changes and stuff and then send it to me. So the schedule got a little, it still came out in a timely manner, but I don't even know if I'd call that a difficulty. I just wrote the book and it got published. It's like about my 30th book. So,
Oh, wow. Okay. Was there any character that you particularly loved or hated
in the Jigsaw Assassin?
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh. Well, I like Major Bhaajan. There's a little bit of me in her. I'm nowhere
I
near.
thought so.
Yeah.
I thought so.
Flattered when people ask it. I'm nowhere near as tough as she is. I can't throw people all over my back and conquer them in martial arts. Whatever she does.
But you wish you could.
Oh, well, yeah, it would be nice. I could. I tried to take a martial arts class one time and I kept pulling my punches. And finally the teacher said, you have to put more strength in it. I said, but I'm afraid I'll hurt the person I'm fighting. He said, no. If you fight in a manner determined to absolutely never hurt anyone, he said, it kind of defeats purpose. He said, and he was into the philosophy too, that you learn, use it only when necessary, but that doesn't mean never. It's hard but writing someone like Major Bhaajan was therefore very satisfying for me.
Okay. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Well, I've got a lot of projects. Right now, I'm trying to get rid of all my past inventory. So I've mostly been concentrating on contacting booksellers and seeing if they want any of it really cheap. Because I have boxes of hundreds and hundreds of boxes, and I'm going to move eventually from New York to California. Once I get all that done, there's 3 things I would like to work on. One is a book that my husband and one of his colleagues wrote on black holes, and they got about 80% to 90% through the first draft, and they were getting it illustrated. They're scientists at NASA, and this was a book about black holes, and they're 2 of the experts, especially this fellow my husband worked for. They're like world-renowned experts on the areas that they were writing about in the book. They, like my husband was part of the LIGO team, this huge team of thousands of people, 1,000 people that worked on the LIGO telescope that discovered gravity waves, that kind of thing. And then his first author passed years ago. It was Neil Garrels, who's now, they renamed the satellite. He was the chief, the head research person on, the primary investigator. They renamed it the Neil Garrels satellite. And when he passed away, my husband especially wanted to finish the book in honor of him, and that he got a lot more done on it. And they got the illustrations from a professional science illustrator. And then my husband passed years later, at the end of 2018. So I inherited the book. And I talked to people at NASA. I talked to the head of the division where Neil and my husband worked. And I talked to Neil's wife. And I talked to the legal department at NASA, because the conditions under which you publish depend on what you're publishing. Some of the work with the government, you have to check with them first. So I checked with the legal department. And they said, yes, it's all right if you seek commercial publication on this book. Neil's wife said, yes, it's okay. NASA told me that I had their support. So I've been working on it. I was preparing the prospectus for a nonfiction book is actually sometimes longer than the book itself. So I was working on that. And then I had to go on hold with it because, the Jigsaw Assassin, that kind of thing. So I would like to finish that. I'm actually pretty close to having a proposal ready to send out. It's a popular nonfiction book on black holes, written by 2 of the top people in the field. with you know how sometimes there's a third editor who kind of takes things and puts them in more commercial language.
Oh, wow.
So that's one project. The other project is another Skolian Empire, the sequel to the Quantum Rose, which won the Nebula.
Great.
So I want to start as a new series. It starts in a new place. It starts, the characters. I mean, they've appeared in other books, but this would be their series. So I'll probably start it as a separate series from the Skolian Empire.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. So I have some questions for you about being a writer. What's your favorite part of being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
The freedom. I can write when I want. Okay. I can get up when I want. I can set my own hours. I mean, the downside of that is when a book is due, you've got to work a lot of hours to get it through, unless you are very conscientious about writing a certain amount of a day. So you have to meet deadlines. I mean, it's not complete freedom, but it's so different from a 9-to-5 job. The satisfaction, I love telling stories. I almost have to write. Mm-hmm. I don't know how else to put it. It's like part of me.
Okay. Now, what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process and how do you overcome that?
Well, now with everything changing, the market is so different now. There used to be a very set path that you followed. You submitted to, publishers, big publishers. There weren't a lot of small publishers. There were some indie, but not as many as there are now by any stretch of the imagination. Prior to the digital book era, you just kept submitting, and if you were talented, if you had the talent, which more people do than realize it. But in addition to that, you also had to keep submitting. You had to learn how to accept rejection letters. You had to learn how to work with, if an editor expressed interest, you had to be willing to take editorial input, which a lot of authors are very awkward with. So that was the process. You sent in, you went into the slush pile, is how they used to put it. And if you were lucky, an editor took an interest, then you got out of the slush pile. And if you're really lucky, you got published. And it's not just luck. I say luck with quotation marks, because if you kept at it and you had talent, eventually you would find a home, but it could take years. And then, there was a revolution with digital publishing. Suddenly everybody could publish. You didn't have to go through this long, expensive process of having book typeset manually, all this stuff. So I think the hardest thing currently is navigating all. It shifted from print book to digital publication, which a lot of us saw coming before it actually happened. If you were tech savvy at all, you could see we were headed in that direction, but it's still hard to prepare for it. Mm-hmm. It's probably harder to get contracts now with traditional publishers for paper books, because everything is shifted. The income is it's no longer known quantity because the technology is shifting and what we're able to do. Also, there's a lot more available. The one thing I will say about the old days was you could be pretty sure that if you bought a book from a well-known publisher, or if you just bought a book in general, it would be well edited. It would be well typeset. It would be well, you might not like the cover, but, it would be professionally done. Now it's a little bit harder to make determinations, mm-hmm. which is nice in some ways, because there's not a gate. There's nobody being a gatekeeper anymore. It's a lot easier, for example, to get books with minority protagonists published now. It's a lot easier to get alternate, anything, alternate sexualities, alternate ethnicities, alternate races, diversity, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So that's one of the advantages. It's a lot easier for people who don't know the traditional route through publishing, to follow their own route. People can publish themselves. There's no longer a stigma. There might be a little one still a bit, but not like it used to be. It's
Mhm.
no longer called vanity publishing. You're a published author if you publish a book.
Mhm. But it's also harder in some ways for the people who self-publish to sell the books.
Yeah, because there's
Uh,
so
yeah,
that's the problem with having so many.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so what has been your favorite adventure
Yeah.
in your writing career?
Oh gosh. I don't know my favorite adventure. Wow. There's been a lot of things that have been interesting. I don't know if I'd call them my favorite. Oh, I know. Okay, an adventure. If I think of an adventure as going somewhere different, I think like going overseas. And I've had the opportunity several times to go overseas. One was when I was the guest of honor at in Copenhagen at their national, the Danish national, fantastic con. It's their national science fiction convention. That was wonderful. I had a blast. And the other time is when I went to New Zealand as their guest of honor um, for their national science fiction convention. It was a wonderful experience in both cases. I get to see a country I'd never been to. Copenhagen is lovely.
So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Stop doubting myself.
Yep.
Stop thinking, wow, this is a piece of, am I allowed to say it? Because other people tell you that whenever they want. So you have to learn to tune it out, right? I think the self-doubt, the sense that as soon as it goes to publication, oh God, I can't believe I actually let that go to publication. And then did I say what I wanted to say? Do I have anything useful to say? Did I tell the story right? At some point, I mean, I've had roughly 30 books. If you count the novellas, it might have been more than that. Not all of them have been in the Scoian Empire series, but I've had a lot of books. I've edited a few, I've had a lot of short fiction published. You eventually reach the point where you have to accept people keep buying my stuff. It can't be as bad as I think it is.
Okay. Now, what piece of advice would you want to share with other writers?
Be persistent. That's an easy one. Don't give up. And if I were advising a writer now, I would suggest that they start trying to get publication with the more traditional, it's a lot harder now to be traditionally published, and there's so many more options. And I know a lot of writers feel, I spent all this time. I don't want to spend another year trying to get it published, another year or 2 or 3. I'll just publish it myself. And that's fine. I mean, a lot of people do that. There's some wonderful books out there because these people didn't get stopped in the pipeline. They put it out themselves. But at the same time, if you can go with the traditional publisher, you get much better distribution. You had mentioned before, it's hard for self-published authors to get good distribution. If you go with a traditional publisher, you get that distribution. They have all the canonical distribution channels. They can do promotion at a level. They still expect authors to do promotion more now than ever. And if you're like me and you're not comfortable with that, it can be difficult. But you learn how to do that, because you want to support your book, you want to support your publisher. But they also do their own, they send your book to review sources, Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, Library Journal, places that are harder to get into if you're self-published. So my recommendation is try to go the traditional route, at least give it some time. And if you're impatient, you can put one thing up self-published. Oh, the reason I say do one or the other is because if you self-publish something, it's a lot harder to get a publisher to look. They'll say, well, it's already been published. I'm not buying reprints. So you know, maybe if you want to get something up, self-publish one thing, in the meantime, send out, you know, follow the more traditional route of trying to get published with a traditional publisher. You can always keep trying. You can self-publish stuff. Getting the same book with a traditional publisher that's been self-published is a lot harder. It's not impossible. People do it. But you can always be sending one book here, putting up one book there. You know, you have a lot of options now. Also, short fiction. You know, if you're waiting to hear on a book, write some short fiction and send it. There's a lot of venues. Science fiction fantasy is probably the most vibrant, expansive market for short fiction that exists. There's tons of, you know, look at SIFWA's list of, I think it's still up there. They had a list of professional level short fiction magazines, venues, online and traditional paper.
I've also heard that if you send to a traditional publisher, if you have more than one book ready, it's better. You have a better chance.
I don't know how true that is.
Oh, okay.
They do seem to like series, but they don't want to buy a book from an unknown author that ends on a cliffhanger unless they're willing to buy the whole series, right? Or at least the book that resolves the cliffhanger.
Oh, not necessarily a series, but several books by
that
the
they
same
know.
author.
I see what you're saying. Yes. What they want to know is that you can keep writing and write in a timely fashion. And if you have several books that you've written, I would suggest don't say it's part of a series. Say I have several other books. They don't require, you know, you don't have to. What they're a little bit leery of is having to buy, you know, say on an unknown author. They will if they like the author, you know, and then also they can lock you if they really like you and they think you're going to make a lot of money. They can lock you in for longer if they buy more books. So let's say they bought 3 books from you at $5,000 each a book, and then the first book took off on the bestseller list. You know, if they bought 3 books, so they don't have to pay you any more advance, right? Whereas if they'd only bought the first book, and then your book took off and hit the bestseller list, they might have to pay, you know, $50,000 for the next one. You know, so that's the very rare case, but it's a case that they're aware of. So, you know, they are looking at that. If you do have a series, you can say, well, this book that I'm sending you is standalone. That is, it can be bought on its own. But there are, you know, other books in this series, and I've already written them. The other thing they're looking is how easy is the author to work with. And let me tell you, that's a big deal because a lot of authors, and I've been an editor too, so I know this happens. If you say, you know, you look at their book and go, oh, that's really good, but that thing that's not working. And so you're all excited and you go talk to the author and they'll go, no, I'm happy with it. And they absolutely do not want to hear any suggestions for change. This is a sticky point because I'm an author too. I know how it feels to have someone tell you to change your baby. But one thing I discovered was editors, especially that professional editors at the big houses or the well-known magazines, they know their stuff. I mean, I was fortunate that my first editor was David Hartwell at Tor. He was brilliant. And he could tell me one thing that, you know, and it would be said so well that I could apply it to all my writing. I remember one time I had a scene that, you know, it wasn't quite working. It was a little too violent. The violence maybe wasn't needed. And David said to me, he said, you know, I know the point you're trying to make, that this character is traumatized and he's responding by getting violent. He said, I don't think you need to do that. He said, there's a point where this vase breaks and he slowly picks up each piece of the vase and very slowly puts it back on the table. And he said, that does everything right there. That says everything you want to say. You know, the vase is the broken pieces of the vase are like symbolic of what this guy's going through. And that didn't just help me write that scene better. I mean, it helped me write, you know, science fiction better, helped me write better, period. because you can apply what an editor like that says to everything you write. I mean, I was really lucky to have an editor like that. And it's been the same with all my editors. They've been, you know.
Great.
Yeah. So that's also a very important piece of advice to
Okay.
offer. Don't be afraid of your editor.
That is a good piece of advice. Now, are there any clubs, groups, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that might have helped you with your career?
Well, SIFWA, of course, then they might make you president. I was president for 2 years. You know, I really like being in SIFWA. I did a lot of volunteer work. You know, I enjoyed meeting people. It was great for networking. And then one day they came and said, "We want you to be president. This has been a very contentious time, and you're a calm, you know, person who makes, you know, helps mediate problems. So we want you to be president." And when, like, the science fiction authors you've admired, worshipped all your life, you know, that you've looked up to, are calling you and saying, "We want you to do this." I mean, how can you say no? So yeah.
Okay. So
That's not something I would advise doing.
no.
That was a tough job. It was a tough job.
So and now I have some questions for you about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
It used to be that I was really good at math.
I'm sorry.
However, I ran a math. I used to be that I was really good at math.
Oh,
People would look at me and, you know, that's not the first thing they think of. Math and science, you know, my doctorate is in theoretical chemical physics, which is essentially it's applied math. It's mathematics, the techniques of mathematical physics applied to solving a math problem. I mean, a physics problem. People would not look at me and they would not think that.
yeah.
But, you know, it's been, well, I still get that. I still get that. You know, say, "Oh, you know, she obviously doesn't know math. Oh, this is not a good description of math." I'm like, dude, I have more math background than you do. Those guys mostly do. But, you know, I mean, I spent 20 years running the Chesapeake math program, this huge math program for, you know, profoundly gifted students. I've, you know, chaired conferences, stuff like that. So it's less so now than it used to be. I think people are also more accepting now. It's still not easy, you know, being a woman or any kind of minority in mathematics. And physics probably is even harder, less diverse representation than math itself. But my daughter is a brilliant mathematician. She's better than I was. She's, you know, and she's very active in trying to encourage women and minorities to come into mathematics, because it's still, you know, it's not only that, you know, someone will not think that, you know, someone like me or someone like her could do math, but also that you learn to internalize the expectations of society and yourself. And I think I did a lot more. She grew up in a time where, I mean, her mother was a mathematician. Her father was a, you know, theoretical physicist. So she grew up with that. She grew up with, you know, in an environment where she was told, "Oh, yes, you're very good at math. You should consider doing this." And I even ran a math club for her, you know, so she could meet other kids like herself. A part of why I did that was because when I was a kid, I internalized what I got from the culture. Back in the 1960s, you know, nobody thought girls could do math as a profession or physics. You know, I like physics. I'm an applied mathematician because I like to apply the math to the physical problems. And part of that got in my head. I happen to be rather ornery. You know,
I understand that. Yeah.
so if someone says you can't do that, I'm like, "Oh yeah, you watch me." But it's still hard to get rid of it. It's still hard to step outside of your comfort zone that way.
Yeah. So what is or are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time for the things that you love?
Oh gosh, well, I love my family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in that sense, I was lucky. You know, you asked me before about, about being a writer. What's good about being a writer? Well, being able to spend time being a mom and still do my job was incredible to me. You know, it's easy for me to say, yes, you should, if you are passionate about your job, you should keep doing it. You should find a way to combine motherhood and working. And a lot of women do now. And I think the culture is much more accepting of it than when I was young. But it's easy for me to say I had a job that literally I could do in the corners of time that when my daughter was asleep or, after she went to bed at night. Not, most people don't have a job that allows them that flexibility.
Right. But what, aside from your family, do you have any other hobbies or
hobbies? Well, I'm a singer.
That's what I was hoping you would say.
Yeah, I don't know. When I was living in Maryland, I had a whole network. I worked with a lot of musicians, excellent musicians. I was very fortunate. I had an accompanist named Greg Adams, who was incredibly talented. And he was very modest. Like he'd say, he was a jazz musician. And I'd give him a piece of music and I'd say, can you play this? And he said, well, I'd have to sight read. And then he'd play it perfectly, beautifully with all sorts of improvisation. And I'd sing it and I'd say, well, I think it needs a higher key. And he'd say, well, I'd have to transpose it. And then he transposes it right there to a higher key. It's just incredible. And he would write music for my original songs. I mean, I'd come up with the song and I'd play it for him and he'd make the music, beautifully done sheet music for, what I sent him. So, and Greg did all this work with me on it. Anything I wanted, he could do it. He was like this incredible musician. And he would get other musicians. He got musicians to work on that. So that the beautiful music you hear on that song is due to the fact that this excellent accompanist. Yeah. But when I left, I lost it all. I lost all the places I played at. I don't know any places here in Long Island. And COVID hit. COVID hit not long after I left. So I don't know if I could say that's a hobby because I haven't been doing it.
Okay. Yeah, but you do sing.
What?
You do sing.
Yeah, I sing. I'm singing at Worldcon.
Right. So what does your writing space look like? And what what do you need to have with you?
I'm serious. This is my bed. I'm sitting in my writing space.
Do you need to have do you need to have any coffee or water or food?
Oh, yes.
With you? Coffee?
I got an intravenous,
Yeah, I know that feeling. And when you're writing, do you prefer music or silence?
When I first started, it was when I was very young, I would listen to music all the time. Never do homework, never do anything. I just listen to music and make up stories. I didn't know I was a writer then. I was doing what writers do, but I didn't know it. I would make up stories in my head, and then I evolved them over the years. So that was done to music. I'd actually choreograph, certain scenes to music. And I kept on doing that after I became a writer, but I couldn't actually listen to music while I was writing. And then it kind of changed for a while. And then it changed back. What I do now is I start to write until I get tense or nervous. This happens to me when I'm writing. I just and I can't do anymore. I don't know why. So I'll have music ready on my computer and then I'll listen to that and make up stories in my head until I feel ready to go back to writing. And sometimes it only takes a few minutes to,
So what kind of music? Lyrics, non-lyrics?
All sorts. Okay. So some of it's original, some of it is like Trans-Siberian Orchestra, some of it's classical, some of it is pop, it was pop when I was a kid most of the time, rock and roll.
So writers very often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions with them to either help or hinder them with their work. And do you have any? And
I always had cats. I love cats. When I moved here, I moved to Long Island 3 years ago. I mentioned that before. Our cats passed away in Maryland. We lived a long time. My cat was nearly 20 when she passed. When I came here, I wasn't sure how long I was staying, so I didn't get a cat, and I've really noticed the difference. I went to go get some. Oh, this is sad. I went to get some a couple weeks ago, and I fell in love with these cats, these kittens at the adoption center. And they did the whole process, and they got my references. And then when I was checking out the house to bring the cats home, I realized I have an open stairway that's very long. It's open at the back of the stairs. So kittens could fall through the stairs 9 feet. Those kittens could fall 9 feet. And I did everything I could to find a way to fix it. Could they put plexiglass, and they said, well, we could, it's going to damage your stairs, right? And in the end, I realized I couldn't get cats in this house without hurting them, or even, they could die if they fell out. So I couldn't get them. I was so sad. I even had picked out the ones I wanted.
Oh,
But
that's
go ahead.
oh,
I still managed to ride.
oh well, you can maybe get an older cat who would know better.
We realized the guys who came to see if they could cat proof my house, we were looking at, they said, a full-grown cat can fall through this. So eventually I will probably move from here. Once my daughter's settled, and hopefully starts a family, I'll probably move out there. I'm her child carrier.
Okay. Now I have 2 more questions for you. One is, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And you can get any of Catherine's books at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. So where else could people find your books?
Well, pretty much any bookstore, Amazon, of course. Simon & Schuster is a distributor. So if you go to their site will send you to the sites like Baen Books, actually the science fiction line of Simon & Schuster. It's just they're an independent publisher. They're very clever. I don't know quite how they got that worked out, but they are their own publisher. And they're also the closest thing Simon & Schuster has to a science fiction and fantasy line. So any of those places, if you go to either Simon & Schuster or Baen, they'll have all the options there for you to order the book. You can get it online.
Okay. And how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Well, I have a thank you, by the way. I have if you go to my website, which is catherineasaro.net, not .com. Someone had that already for some reason. So if you go to catherineasaro.net, there on the contact page, you can subscribe to my newsletter. Also, if you don't want me to have to get a job waitressing to help support myself, I have a Patreon page. I don't know are you familiar with Patreon?
Yes.
Yeah, this is where people can say, all right, I'll give you $1 a month. You essentially subscribe to the author rather than to the books. So the usual people give $5, but you can start at $1, or you can give more if you want. It's your choice. However little or much you want to give is fine. We appreciate every cent. And every month, you give like $1 or $5 or $10 to this author you like, and it helps us write. You become our patrons. That's why they call it Patreon. The nice thing about that page is I put up stuff there that I don't put other places, like free books, free this, free that. Or I talk, gossip about my life. How the deer are invading my gardens,
That sounds great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Catherine. And maybe someday we'll see you at our store.
I hope so. I would love
Worcester.
to. I'd love to.
Great. Okay, Catherine Asaro, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.